I've been a trucker for about 15 years. Seen all kinds of strange things on the road. It's the kind of life where you learn to shrug off the occasional oddity. A lone hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere, animals darting into your headlights, lights on the horizon that just don't make sense. But there's one night I can't shrug off no matter how hard I try. Started like any other haul. I was driving a flatbed through the back roads of Nevada. My dispatcher routed me this way to avoid the highway patrol. I had a slightly overloaded trailer and wasn't in the mood for a way station. The route was desolate. Just miles and miles of flat nothingness, broken only by the occasional scrub brush and the glint of moonlight off old road signs. The first thing that set me on edge was the radio. It had been dead silent for hours, not even the usual static from far-off stations. I wasn't exactly surprised. This was the middle of nowhere, after all. But when I tried to switch over to my CB, I got nothing but faint whispers. At first, I thought it was a technical issue, maybe interference from the nearby Air Force Base. But as I kept fiddling with the dials, the whispers grew louder, turning into overlapping voices. "Turn back," one of them hissed. I chuckled nervously, chalking it up to my own sleep-deprived brain. But when I glanced at the clock on the dash, it was 3:33 a.m. on the dot. Great. Witching hour on an empty highway. Perfect timing. About 30 minutes later, I passed an old gas station. Just a flickering neon sign and two ancient pumps. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but the clerk inside was watching me. Not like normal people watch, though. He was standing completely still, eyes locked on my truck as I rumbled past. Something about the way he stood, rigid, too tall, like a mannequin propped up in a shop window, sent a chill down my spine. But the kicker came about an hour later. I was on a stretch of road where the landscape barely changed. The same Joshua trees and cracked asphalt rolled endlessly under my wheels. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I assumed it was a coyote or some desert critter, so I slowed down to avoid hitting it. But when I looked closer, it wasn't an animal. It was a person. A woman in a torn, faded sundress was walking along the shoulder of the road, barefoot and swaying like she was about to pass out. I slowed even more, pulling up alongside her. "Ma'am, you okay?" I called out through the open passenger window. She turned her head, and her eyes, they weren't right. The pupils were too wide, swallowing up the whites entirely. She didn't respond, just kept walking, her bare feet crunching on gravel. That's when I noticed something even stranger. She wasn't leaving any footprints. I don't know why I didn't just hit the gas and leave her behind. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was some misplaced sense of obligation. Either way, I decided to stop. I pulled the rig over, leaving the engine idling as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The desert air was bone dry and still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. "Hey, you need help?" I called, shining the flashlight toward her. She stopped walking but didn't turn around. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me, but then her head tilted ever so slightly, just enough to let me know she was listening. "Ma'am?" I tried again, taking a cautious step closer. Finally, she turned to face me. I'll never forget that face. Her skin looked wrong, like old wax left too close to a flame. Shiny in some places, cracked in others. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide into a smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "You shouldn't have stopped," she whispered. I froze. My grip tightened on the flashlight as every instinct screamed at me to run. Before I could react, she bolted, straight into the desert, moving faster than any human should. I don't know what possessed me to follow her. Maybe I just wanted to make sense of what I'd seen. I grabbed my phone from the truck, turned on the flashlight, and jogged after her. The desert seemed endless, but her pale figure stood out against the dark landscape. No matter how fast I ran, she stayed just out of reach. My boots crunched over brittle shrubs and loose rocks, the sound deafening in the otherwise silent night. Then she stopped. She stood completely still in the middle of a dried-out creek bed, her back to me. The hair on my arms stood on end as I slowed my pace. "Why are you out here?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't respond. Instead, she raised one hand and pointed. I followed the direction of her finger, my flashlight cutting through the dark until it landed on something I didn't expect to see out here. A truck. Not just any truck. An old, rusted semi, half sunk into the sand like it had been there for decades. Its headlights were smashed. The cab crumpled as if it had hit something massive. The closer I got, the colder the air became. My breath started to fog, and the flashlight flickered. "Hey!" I called out again, spinning around to find the woman. But she was gone. The truck groaned. It was faint, but I swear I heard it. A low, metallic creak, like the sound of something shifting under pressure. That's when I saw the hand. It dangled out of the driver's side window, skeletal and impossibly long, its fingers curling slightly as if beckoning me closer. My legs locked up, every nerve in my body screaming to turn and run. But I couldn't. It was like that skeletal hand had rooted me to the spot, its fingers twitching ever so slightly in the pale light of my flashlight. The truck groaned again, louder this time, as though something deep within its twisted frame was coming alive. The air grew colder still, biting through my jacket and stinging my skin. Against every shred of better judgment, I stepped closer. As I approached, the hand retreated back into the cab with an unsettling, boneless fluidity. My flashlight beam shook, the light barely holding steady as I forced myself to peer through the shattered driver's side window. Inside, the cab was a wreck. The seat was torn to shreds, springs jutting out like jagged teeth. The dashboard was cracked, its dials frozen in place. But what drew my attention wasn't the state of the truck. It was the thing sitting in the driver's seat. It wasn't human. At first, I thought it was just a pile of rags. But then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, the thing turned its head toward me, revealing a face, or what was left of one. Its features were warped and indistinct, like a melted mannequin. Empty sockets stared at me, blacker than the night around us. And then it smiled. The smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting the skin around its mouth to reveal rows of jagged, mismatched teeth. The sound of tearing flesh filled the air, wet and nauseating, as its grin grew wider and wider. "Come closer," it rasped. The voice was like gravel grinding together, low and grating, and it came from everywhere at once. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My instincts finally overrode my curiosity, and I turned to run. But when I spun around, she was there, the woman in the sundress. Her grin matched the thing in the truck, too wide and too sharp. She was standing just inches from me now, her empty eyes boring into mine. "You shouldn't have followed," she whispered. Her voice was layered, as if a dozen people were speaking in unison. Behind me, the truck groaned again, the sound rising to a deafening metallic screech. My flashlight flickered wildly, casting the scene in stuttering flashes of light and shadow. In the chaos, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, crunching through the sand. I turned my head just enough to see the thing from the cab crawling out of the truck. It moved on all fours, its limbs bending in ways that defied logic, its jagged grin glinting in the flickering light. That was it. Survival instincts kicked in and I bolted. The desert blurred around me as I ran, my boots slipping on loose sand and rocks. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. I could hear them, the woman and the thing from the truck, their footsteps growing louder, their raspy breaths closing in. In the distance, the faint glow of my rig's headlights appeared. I poured every ounce of energy into reaching them, my lungs burning and my legs screaming in protest. As I reached the truck, I leapt into the cab, slamming the door behind me. My hands fumbled with the keys, panic making them clumsy. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, the tires spinning for a moment before catching traction. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but I caught a glimpse of them in the rearview mirror. They stood side by side in the middle of the road, watching as I sped away. The woman tilted her head, her grin never faltering, while the thing crouched low, its limbs twitching unnaturally. And then they vanished. One moment they were there, the next the road was empty. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, a tiny on the map with one gas station and a diner. I parked under the brightest lights I could find and sat there for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. But when I finally stepped out of the truck, I saw it. Scratched into the side of the cab in deep, jagged lines was a single word. Next. That word, next. Etched into my rig chilled me more than anything else that night. It wasn't just a message. It was a promise. A declaration. I stayed in that diner until dawn, guzzling black coffee and staring at the parking lot. Every time the door chimed, my heart jumped, expecting to see her step through, or worse, the thing from the truck. But the only people who came in were tired waitresses, long-haul truckers like me, and a couple of bleary-eyed locals grabbing breakfast. By the time the sun started to rise, I convinced myself I was safe. Whatever had happened back there, it stayed in the desert. That's what I told myself, anyway. I climbed back into my rig, avoiding the scratches on the side as if looking at them would give them power. My next stop wasn't far, just a few hundred miles down the road, and I wanted to put as much distance as possible between me and the events of the night before. The first few hours were uneventful. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, and the bright sunlight made it easier to shake off the lingering fear. By noon, I'd almost convinced myself it had been some kind of waking nightmare, a mix of exhaustion and the isolation of the open road. But then the radio came back. It wasn't music or static this time. It was the whispers. At first, I thought it was interference again, but as I fiddled with the dial, the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic jumble of voices. "Keep going," one of them hissed. Another voice broke through, deeper and slower. "Stop!" I yanked the cord to turn the radio off, but it stayed on. The whispers continued, growing more frantic, and now there was something else. A faint thudding, like footsteps. I glanced at the passenger seat, half expecting to see her sitting there, but the cab was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road. It wasn't her, but it wasn't quite human either. The thing was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its skin ashen and tight against its bones. It didn't move as I approached, just stood there, blocking my path. I honked the horn, but it didn't flinch. My hands tightened on the wheel as I debated what to do. Swerving around it seemed risky. Who knew what else might be waiting out there in the desert? As I got closer, I realized it was holding something. A sign. The letters were scrawled in a messy, dripping black ink that looked more like tar than paint. "Your turn." The rig's engine roared as I floored it, refusing to slow down. If this thing wanted to play chicken, it picked the wrong truck. At the last second, it vanished. Not like it dove out of the way or stepped aside. It was just gone, as if it had never been there. The relief was short-lived. A loud bang erupted from the back of the truck, and the whole rig shuddered violently. My heart leapt into my throat as I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the trailer looked fine. Another bang, this time louder. The entire cab rattled as though something massive had slammed into it. I pulled over, heart pounding, and grabbed my tire iron before stepping out. The desert was silent, the sunlight glaring off the metal of the trailer. Nothing seemed out of place at first. The trailer was intact, the tires weren't flat, and there was no sign of anything or anyone around. Then I saw them. Handprints. They were smeared all over the back of the trailer, long and bony, with fingers that stretched too far to be human. The prints were black, the same tar-like substance that had been on the sign. As I stared at them, a low, guttural growl rumbled from beneath the trailer. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. Slowly, I crouched down, peering under the trailer. There it was, the thing from the truck. Its grin was impossibly wide, its empty sockets fixed on me as it clung to the undercarriage like a spider. "You're next," it whispered, its voice echoing in my head. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. I dove back into the cab, slamming the door behind me and flooring it. The rig roared to life, tires kicking up dust as I sped down the highway. In the mirror, I saw it crawl out from under the trailer, standing in the middle of the road as I sped away. It didn't chase me. It didn't need to. It had made its point. When I finally reached the next truck stop, I parked under the brightest lights I could find and called it in. Told dispatch I was done, quitting right then and there. That was the last haul I ever made. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and I think I'm alone, I hear it. Faint whisper. Your turn. After I quit trucking, I tried to move on. But life wasn't so simple anymore. Every corner of my world felt stained by that night. The scratches on my rig haunted me, even though I sold it to the first buyer who offered cash. I didn't even care about the price, I just needed it gone. But the whispers followed me, creeping in when I least expected them. At first, I told myself it was my imagination. PTSD, maybe. I'd seen things, sure, but nothing that couldn't be explained away as stress and exhaustion. That's what I told the therapist, anyway. But deep down, I knew better. Started small. One night, I was flipping through channels on the TV, trying to drown out my own thoughts, when the screen froze. At first, I thought it was a cable issue, but then the picture changed. It wasn't the show I'd been watching anymore. The screen showed a road long, empty, and eerily familiar. It was the same stretch of highway where I'd first seen her. The image flickered, and for a split second, I saw the woman in the sundress standing in the middle of the road, her hollow eyes staring directly at me. I turned the TV off, my hands shaking, but the reflection on the dark screen still showed her face, grinning at me. I left the house that night, sleeping in my car at a crowded rest stop. Then there were the dreams, or maybe they weren't dreams. In one, I was back in my rig, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. The radio hissed with static, and the whispers began, louder than ever. Keep going, they urged. You can't stop now. When I looked in the mirrors, I saw them. The woman, the thing from the truck. They were in the trailer, their faces pressed against the small window, their grins too wide, their eyes too dark. I slammed on the brakes, but the truck didn't stop. The cab filled with laughter, low, guttural, and layered, like 100 voices laughing all at once. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, my heart racing so fast I thought it might explode. But when I looked out the window, my car wasn't parked at the rest stop anymore. It was on the side of that same stretch of highway. I started avoiding mirrors after that. Anything reflective seemed to hold a piece of them, a glimpse of that grinning face waiting for me to let my guard down. But the worst part, the part one can't shake no matter how hard I try, is the feeling that they're watching. Not just at night, not just in mirrors or dreams. Always. I moved 3 times in the past year trying to stay ahead of it. New towns, new jobs, new routines. But no matter where I go, I can't escape them. A few weeks ago, I found something scratched into the door of my car. It was the same tar-black substance I'd seen on the trailer, smeared into the paint in jagged, uneven lines. Soon, I don't know what's coming, but I know it's not over. Whatever they are, they're patient. They're waiting. For me. For my turn. And if you're hearing this, maybe they're waiting for you too. I've spent the past few nights with all the lights on, barely daring to sleep. Every creak of the house, every groan of the wind outside feels like them creeping closer. I know I can't run forever, but I'm not ready to give up. Not yet. Last night, something changed. It started with a tapping sound on my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was just the wind brushing against the glass, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Came in sets of 3, tap, 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 like someone was out there knocking. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, hesitating as I approached the window. My hand trembled as I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. The backyard was empty, just the usual tangle of shadows cast by the fence and trees. But the moment I turned away, the tapping started again. This time, it was coming from the front door. I froze. My mind raced through every possibility. An intruder, some prankster, or worse, them. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. 3 knocks, then 3 more. Against my better judgment, I crept toward the door. I peered through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was her. The woman in the sundress stood on my porch, her head tilted at that unnatural angle, her grin stretching too wide for her face. She raised one hand, her fingers unnaturally long, and knocked again. Tap, tap, tap. Open the door, She whispered, though her lips never moved. The sound was inside my head, crawling through my skull like spiders. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, and grabbed the nearest thing I could find. A baseball bat I kept by the couch. When I turned back, she was gone. But the door, carved into the wood, deep and jagged, were the words, "We're here." I didn't sleep after that. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and got in my car, determined to put as much distance between me and that house as possible. I drove aimlessly for hours, the darkness of the highway pressing in on all sides. Every so often, I thought I saw movement in the mirrors, flickers of shadows or the brief glint of eyes. But when I turned to look, the road behind me was empty. Then the radio came on. I hadn't touched it, but the whispers filled the car, louder than ever. "Keep going," they urged, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. "We're waiting." The headlights flickered, the dashboard lights dimming as the car began to sputter. "No, no, no," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. The engine stalled, and the car coasted to a stop in the middle of the highway. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I reached for my phone, but the screen was black, unresponsive. My flashlight wouldn't turn on either. Then, in the distance, I saw them. Figures standing on the road, their shapes barely visible in the dim moonlight. At first, there were only a few, 3 or 4, scattered across the asphalt. But as I watched, more appeared, stepping out of the darkness one by one. The woman was among them, her sundress fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. The thing from the truck was there too, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it crawled forward. They surrounded the car, their faces twisted into those impossibly wide grins. "Your turn," they whispered, their voices overlapping in a deafening chorus. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. The next thing I knew, it was dawn, and I was parked at a gas station miles away. The car was running, my bag still on the passenger seat, untouched. But there was something new. On the dashboard, scratched into the plastic, were 3 words. "Not yet." I don't know what they want or why they've chosen me. But one thing's clear, they're not done. And if you're reading this, hearing this, whatever form this story takes, maybe you'll understand the truth. They're not just watching me anymore. They're watching us. So if you hear whispers on the radio, or see something in the corner of your mirror that doesn't belong, don't stop. Don't look back, because your turn might be next. I haven't stayed in one place for more than a few days since that night. I thought constant movement would help, that if I never settled, they couldn't catch up. But the truth is, they don't need to chase me. They're always there, watching, waiting. The signs are subtle now. A flicker in a gas station mirror. A shadow too dark to be mine. Whispers crackling through static whenever I pass through an empty stretch of highway. They're wearing me down. Last night, I stopped at a motel off a forgotten highway somewhere in Oklahoma. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, but it was cheap and empty, which suited me fine. I checked in, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the knob for good measure. Then I turned on every light in the room and tried to convince myself I'd made it one more night. But then I heard it. It started as a faint scraping sound, like nails on wood. I told myself it was just the wind, just the old building settling. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It was coming from the closet. I froze, every muscle locking up as I stared at the flimsy wooden door. "Don't open it," I whispered to myself. "Just get in the car and go." But my legs wouldn't move. The scraping stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then, slowly, the closet door began to creak open. I didn't see what was inside, not fully. But what I did see was enough. The woman's face, her hollow eyes and too wide grin peeking out from the darkness. "Almost time," she whispered, her voice crawling over my skin like ice. I grabbed my bag and ran, not even bothering to check out. I was back on the road within minutes, the motel fading into the distance behind me. This morning, I noticed something new. A message carved into the hood of my car, deep and jagged like the others. "You can't run. I know they're right. I've been running for so long that I don't even know what I'm running toward anymore. I'm tired. tired of jumping at shadows, tired of looking over my shoulder. But there's something else, something I can't ignore anymore. I think they're getting closer. I see them in the distance now, not just reflections or shadows, but real physical forms, standing on the side of the road, just barely visible in the corner of my eye. And last night, for the first time, I heard her voice clearly. Not through the radio, not in my dreams. She was standing outside my window, whispering my name. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. If you're reading this, maybe you'll think I'm crazy. Maybe you'll think I'm making it all up. But if you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of highway, and you see a figure in the distance, or hear whispers where there shouldn't be any, do yourself a favor. Don't stop, because if you do, you'll learn what I've learned. They're always watching, and they're always waiting. I'm not sure why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's just to get it out before it's too late. Or maybe this is the last thing I'll ever do. Last night was different. I've been driving nonstop for almost 12 hours, only pulling over for gas and to splash cold water on my face. The desert stretched endlessly around me, the road a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through the void. It was nearly 3 a.m. when my headlights picked up something in the distance. A figure standing in the middle of the road. I didn't slow down this time. I knew who it was. Her sundress fluttered in the night breeze, her head tilted in that unnatural way, her grin wider than ever. She didn't move as I sped toward her. She just stood there, watching. At the last moment, I jerked the wheel hard to the right, the tires screeching as the truck veered off the road. The rig shuddered and jolted, the headlights illuminating nothing but barren desert before I skidded to a stop. When I looked back, she was gone. But then the whispers started. They were louder this time, clearer. I couldn't tell where they were coming from. They seemed to fill the cab, pressing against my ears from every direction. "It's time," they said. I turned the key, desperate to start the truck and get out of there, but the engine only sputtered. The headlights flickered, the dashboard lights dimming until the cab was plunged into darkness. Outside, the desert was silent, the night air heavy and oppressive. And then I saw them, figures emerging from the shadows, their movements slow and deliberate. The woman was among them, her hollow eyes locked on mine. Beside her was the thing from the truck, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it crawled closer. Behind them, more figures appeared. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all grinning, all staring. They surrounded the truck, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Your turn," they chanted, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. I grabbed the bat from the passenger seat, my hands trembling as I threw open the door. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. They didn't respond. The woman stepped closer, her movements unnaturally smooth. She stopped just a few feet from me, her grin so wide it seemed to split her face in half. "You can't run anymore," she whispered. "It's time to join us." Before I could react, the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. The air around me seemed to ripple, the figures closing in as the world spun out of focus. I don't remember how I escaped. I woke up this morning in the middle of the desert, my truck parked neatly on the side of the road as if nothing had happened. But things are different now. I can feel them even in daylight. Shadows that move when they shouldn't. Whispers that creep in when the world is quiet. I think they're inside me. I don't know how much longer I have, but I can feel them getting stronger. If you're reading this, listen to me. Stay off the back roads. Don't drive alone at night. And whatever you do, if you see a woman in a sundress standing in the middle of the road, don't stop. Because if you do, you won't just see them. You'll become one of them. And once they've chosen you, there's no turning back. I've been trying to figure out how to end this, how to tell you what's really going on without sounding insane. But I'm running out of time, and you need to hear this. The thing about them, the woman, the thing from the truck, and all the others, they're not just hunting people like me. There's something worse. They're spreading. First, I thought it was just me, that they'd chosen me for some reason, that I was special or cursed. But I've started to notice the signs in other places, in other people. It started with truck stops. I'd see someone staring a little too long at nothing, their eyes wide and unfocused, their movements too stiff, too deliberate. They'd glance at me sometimes, their lips curling into that same horrible grin before turning away. Then it was the gas stations. I watched a clerk behind the counter one night as he rang me up. His hands shook as he handed me my change, his eyes darting to the glass door every few seconds. "They're out there," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. When I turned to look, the parking lot was empty. But as I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass. And she was there, standing just behind me, her grin wide, her eyes hollow. Last week, I passed through a small town in Arizona. It was late, and I only stopped to grab some food before hitting the road again. But the town was wrong. It was too quiet. No cars, no dogs barking, not even the hum of streetlights. The diner I walked into should have been bustling. There were plates of half-eaten food on the tables, still warm, like the people had just vanished. And then I saw the mirror behind the counter. It was covered in fingerprints, long skeletal smears that didn't match any human hand I'd ever seen. The whispers started before I made it back to my truck. They were louder now, more insistent, weaving through the empty streets as I ran. "You're not alone," they said. I've been seeing the signs more often now. On billboards, scratched into bathroom stalls, carved into the wood of picnic tables at rest stops. "Your turn. Almost time." I don't know how they choose or why, but I know this. They're not just after me. They're everywhere. Every time I hear a story about someone disappearing on a lonely road, or someone seeing something strange in their rearview mirror, I know it's them. And if you're reading this, hearing this, whatever form my story takes, then they're probably already watching you too. This might be my last message. I don't think I can fight them much longer. But if you see the signs, the grins, the whispers, the scratches in the dark, don't ignore them. Because when it's your turn, there's no escape. And when you join them, when you finally see what they've shown me, you'll wish you had never stopped. They're waiting for you, and they'll never stop. This is the end for me. I feel it in my bones, in the cold that's seeped into my skin and refuses to leave. They've been closing in, and there's no more running, no more hiding. But before they take me, I want to leave you with the truth. It's not just the roads. It's not just the back highways, the truck stops, or the desert towns. They're everywhere. They live in the spaces we ignore, in the shadows just beyond the edge of the light. They watch from reflections, from the corners of empty rooms, from the gaps between radio static. And they're patient. Last night, I tried something different. I was done running, done pretending I could escape. I stopped the truck in the middle of nowhere, killed the engine, and waited. It didn't take long. The whispers started almost immediately, louder than ever, rising and falling like the tide. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Then they came. First the woman in the sundress, stepping out of the darkness with that horrible, wide grin. Then the thing from the truck, its limbs jerking and twisting as it crawled closer. Behind them, the others emerged, dozens, maybe hundreds, their hollow eyes and twisted smiles glowing faintly in the moonlight. They surrounded the truck, their whispers weaving together into a single, deafening voice. "It's time." I opened the door and stepped out. I thought they would attack, drag me into whatever nightmare they came from. But they just stood there, staring. The woman stepped forward, her head tilting as she looked at me. "You've seen us," she whispered, "and now you'll join us." I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, pulling me to the ground. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the whispers, by the laughter that followed. I woke up this morning in my truck, parked on the side of the highway, but something's wrong. The mirrors don't show my reflection anymore. When I look at my hands, they seem different, thinner. The skin stretched too tight, the bones too long. And the whispers, they're louder now, clearer. They're not just speaking to me, they're speaking through me. If you're hearing this, if you're reading this, it's too late for me. But maybe it's not too late for you. Stay out of the dark. Ignore the whispers. And whatever you do, don't stop for anyone on the road. Because now I understand the truth. I'm one of them, and soon, this is it. The last thing I'll ever write, the last thing you'll ever hear from me. Because by the time you finish reading this, they'll be here. They always come for the ones who know. I thought I could warn you, maybe give you a fighting chance. But the truth is, there's no outrunning them. No hiding. Once they've chosen you, it's already over. I can feel them now, closer than ever. The whispers are inside me, crawling through my veins like ice, threading their way into my thoughts. My reflection in the mirror isn't mine anymore. It's hers. The woman in the sundress. Her grin. Her hollow eyes. They've already taken me. Last night, I gave up. I drove to that same stretch of road where it all began, parked my truck, and stepped out into the dark. They were waiting for me. The woman, the thing from the truck, and all the others. They formed a circle around me, their faces twisted into those unnatural grins. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, filling the night with their terrible, layered voices. And then, everything stopped. The world went silent, the air thick and still. The woman stepped forward, her movements unnaturally smooth, her head tilting as she stared at me. "You're ready," she said. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just stood there as she reached out, her cold, bony fingers brushing against my forehead. And then I saw it. They showed me what's coming. Not just for me, but for all of us. The roads won't stay empty forever. The whispers won't stay in the dark. They're growing, spreading, finding new ways to reach us. Soon they'll be everywhere. They don't just want me. They want everyone. When I woke up, I was back in my truck. But I wasn't the same. The whispers aren't just around me anymore. They're part of me. I can feel them deep inside, waiting to take over completely. And they will. This is your last warning. If you're reading this, you're already in their sights. The whispers will find you. The shadows will follow. And when they come, you'll have to make a choice. Fight or join them. But let me save you the trouble. You can't fight them. You'll join them just like I did. And when you do, you'll understand the truth. We're all just waiting for our turn.